Hi, Clarissa Mosley, psychologist, psychotherapist, and today I'm going to be talking about the ick. You might have heard about the ick of sitcoms, it's a rage on TikTok, but what exactly is the ick? And how do we differentiate the ick from a pet peeve, from a deal breaker, or from a trigger? Can you get over the ick? Who's more likely to get the ick? And should you tell someone who's given you the ick that they gave you the ick? If you're interested to hear more about this, then please watch on. Hi, Clarissa Mosley, psychologist, psychotherapist, and director of Calm Mind Psychology. I make videos on all things psychology, relationships, ego, and personal growth. So if you're interested to hear and learn more about these, you can like and subscribe right now. Today, I'm going to be examining the ick. What is the ick? How would we differentiate it from a pet peeve or a trigger, or maybe just a deal breaker? Who is more likely to experience the ick, and why does it happen? And if you've got the ick, can you get over the ick? Can you undo the ick? And finally, I'll be answering the question, should you tell someone who's given you the ick that they gave you the ick? The ick has been coming under my radar a lot lately. I've heard of people getting the ick for friends, ick for partners, and recently I had somebody come to me, and just so you know, I'm talking mostly about friends or associates or people that I've heard through the grapevine. I do not tell personal stories about my clients. So I had a friend come to me recently who had been dating a guy for a few dates, and on paper he seemed really nice. They got along well, they had some lovely dinners, and then it came time for their first kiss. As this guy kissed her, she became aware that he made really weird sounds when he kissed. There was a clicking sound in his jaw and a sort of a sloppy kissy noise, that kind of thing. And it gave her the ick. She did try to push through this and have a few more dates, and I'll tell you the result of that later. So let's define what we mean by the ick, because I think the ick is getting a little bit overgeneralized on TikTok. So the ick used to be called sudden repulsion syndrome. So about 5 or 6 years back, this was a known phenomenon where there would be a sudden turn-off within usually a dating relationship that seemed unchangeable. Suddenly someone was repulsed by the person that they'd previously liked. Due to some sitcoms and social media, this sudden repulsion syndrome has been renamed with the catchy little name, the ick, which basically pretty much describes it in its entirety. You are disgusted or repulsed by someone who previously you didn't mind at all. In fact, you might have quite liked them. But how do we know that the ick isn't a trigger? How do we know it's not just somebody displaying some of our pet peeves? Or how do we know what an ick is and what's an absolute deal breaker in a relationship? So let's understand these first. A pet peeve is something that we generally know that we don't like. We don't like people making tappy noises. We don't like maybe dirty fingernails or bitten fingernails. We don't like loud laughers in restaurants or people that laugh too explosively. We don't like people that big up themselves. Maybe they drop names. Maybe they drop names of people you haven't even heard about and assume that you have. Maybe you don't like too many emojis and texts or too many abbreviations that you don't understand. Maybe someone's texting style, or maybe in general you don't like texting at all and you'd much prefer to call. I can tell you one of my pet peeves that was also kind of icky. That was a trend several years ago. Pretty much always guys would wear their jeans hanging way down. Well, their undies were showing, their pants, their jockeys, whatever you want to call them, were showing, and the jeans were pulled down. That drove me crazy. I just wanted to go behind them and pull their pants up like a good mom and teach them where the jeans are meant to sit on their waist or hips. So to me, that was a pet peeve. And I'm pretty sure that if I was trying to date someone who wanted to wear their jeans hanging down, it would also become an ick. So pet peeves can become an ick when they show up in a person that you are trying to get to know and like. Triggers, on the other hand, are a little bit deeper and more complex. The word trigger comes from trauma language. It is when something activates an unprocessed or a processed trauma or wound within you. It can trip you into the fight or flight, and it can signal danger or lack of safety. This is a little bit different because it feels a little bit more shocking. It's like, an example would be a woman that I talked to, and she'd been on a first date, and the dinner and the conversation and everything had gone well. And she was pretty adamant that there was going to be nothing further. So this chap drove her home, and when he got to her place, he asked to come in, and she was like, no, absolutely not. It was a wonderful date. I enjoyed getting to know you, but it doesn't go any further than this. Then the chap decided that he needed to go to the bathroom urgently, and he wanted to come into her house to use the toilet. Now, I want to highlight something here because she didn't say no. And I'm going to talk later in the video about people who don't have a very strong no, who are more susceptible to getting the ick. But for this chap to enter her home space under a premise that she felt was really invalid, it gave her the creeps. It triggered her. It showed that he was happy to cross her boundaries. Honestly, he could have gone to a service station and used the restroom there to try and manipulate and maneuver his way inside her home. This was clearly a safety issue. This woman had probably had, like many women, a history of some form of sexual abuse or assault. And so this was a direct trigger. It was more than an ick. So triggers will occur when our wounds are also touched. Maybe somebody is critical or looks or sounds like a parent or a perpetrator from the past. And this activates within us a deep sense of unrest. And so they are our triggers. And the final differentiation is between a deal breaker. Now, deal breakers are where we draw the line in what we will put up with in a relationship, and it hits the end point there. It's like the things we will not tolerate. So say somebody's been dating someone for a while and there's been a lot of social drinking going on, but they notice that their drinks, while maybe they have 2 drinks themselves, the other person's having 4. And as time goes by and they're spending more time with this person, they realize that the other person's drinking is a little bit of a problem. They're getting drunk on almost every date or outing. They realize that this person probably has a problem with drinking. So that is that other person's deal breaker. They do not want to date someone who's got alcohol use issues or alcohol abuse issues, and they're entitled to have their own reasons for this. Other deal breakers would be smoking. Obviously, that can be an ick for some people, but for someone who doesn't smoke at all, dating a smoker is just a deal breaker. They just won't do it. So that's the difference between these other differentiated terms. So the ick, or sudden repulsion syndrome, is where you are suddenly turned off someone. You get disgusted or repulsed. So normally this is a person that you've been getting to know. You might be an early stage getting to know them or dating, or you might be a little bit down the track until this thing reveals itself. And I want to speak to that a little later because I think they're different dynamics and constellations. So the ick will happen when suddenly a behavior in the other person appears that gives you, technically, the heebie-jeebies. It kind of turns you off. Like in the example I gave earlier on in the beginning of the video, when this friend of mine kissed this guy and heard these audible sounds coming from his jaw and lips, it just gave her a repulsive, icky, shuddery, creepy, heebie-jeebie feeling. The ick is usually something visceral. By visceral, I mean there is a bodily sensation created in you. Disgust is very It shows on the face. There's a wrinkling of the nose and a sort of a pulling back and a repelling from that person. It could be a sound. It could be a sight. It could be a touch. It could be a smell or a taste. It's got something to do with the senses, often a combination of. For some people, it's dirty fingernails. That could be their pet peeve, but also their greatest ick, because it's signaling that this person isn't cleaning their hands properly. And for some people, that's a massive turn-off. For other people, it might be the sight of bitten fingernails. And what this does, it conjures within them an image of them biting their fingernails, and that grosses them out. Other people really don't mind. For many people, it's chewing with their mouth open, and it can also attend to movements like tapping on the table or having jiggly legs or some sort of movement that's really irritating to the other person. And maybe these motions are subdued at first. They don't become apparent until later. So this is where I'm going to give you a personal example. So once upon a time, I dated this guy for a little while, and we went out for dinner, and he was very enamored and everything went fine until the time came where I had invited him to my place for dinner, and we were sitting at the table eating. And I'm pretty sure it was a salad of some sort. And he started mixing it up with a spoon. And the spoon would scratch on the bottom of the plate. And then he would sort of shove it into his mouth and kind of chew loudly. But while he was chewing, he's still mixing. And so it wasn't like the mixing happened just once to mix up the salad. It happened several times before each bite. And I just thought of it like eating like a cowboy. You know, in the cowboy movies, they're sitting around with their tin plates and they're scraping through a plate of beans and they're scrape, and then they put it in their mouth and then scrape. It just was the moment when that happened. I thought, this is never going to be a long-term thing. I got the ick. Now, I'm going to go back to this example later in the video to help explain whether or not you can get over the ick. So as mentioned, the ick can occur in friendships, but it's far more likely to happen in dating relationships. And it seems more likely for women to get the ick than men, and I'm going to be explaining the differences in that in a minute. But first I want to look at early stage dating. Now, if it's really early dating, it could be like the first few dates. Often the ick comes up pretty soon. And what I find in those situations is that there is a level of ambivalence, meaning there is an indecision about whether or not you like this person. And so when the ick experience happens, it's kind of like a gut intuition / early warning deal breaker that gives you a reason to opt out of further dates. In the example of my friend who had the kissing experience, that was pretty much the end of it for her. And so there was already an established uncertainty about whether or not she really liked this guy, and the kissing was just something that made her go, no, that's it. So maybe it was her intuition helping her discern that this person was not her person. Or maybe it was something deeper, which I'll discuss soon. And then there's the ick that comes up down the track in dating. And this is a far more interesting situation because there's often a dynamic where somebody is head over heels in this person. They're thinking things are great. And then all of a sudden something comes up and they're like absolutely turned off. So it's that situation which I want to look at a little bit later in the video, after I've described the differences between men and women and the people that are at high risk for getting the ick. So high-risk groups for people who might get the ick are people that have got sensory processing issues, which are often found in ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, the highly sensitive person types, and, as we'll discuss soon, somebody that has a highly avoidant or fearful avoidant attachment style. So sensory issues. let's look at the example of noises kissing, mouth chewing, clicky jaws, fingers tapping on tables unconsciously, legs jiggling. These can all be irritating to someone who has ADHD. They get distracted easily and they cannot switch off the processing of a competing noise, sound, sight, or sensation. The same occurs in high-functioning autism, where there is, again, a lack of being able to filter incoming stimuli, and also with misophonia. So misophonia is a rage reaction to irritating noises, which has a genetic linkage. Chewing with your mouth open is a very highly triggering sound for many people. Misophonia is pretty common. About 50 to 20% of the population experience this. It is found in combination with ADHD or ASD or highly sensitive people who are acutely aware of sights, sounds, sensations, and feelings within themselves. And so once this misophonia has been triggered, the sensation is one of sort of irritation to rage. Similar things with people with chewing gum, with fingernails, scratching, or light sensations on the body. This, with someone who's got a sensory processing issue, is really aggravating. They need a firm touch. And of course, if they're dating someone and they haven't got the rapport to be able to express this, it can register in the body as an irritation and create the sense of ick within them. And so that comes back to what I was going to point to later on about people who don't have their no really well formed, which is often the case in the HSP, the highly sensitive person, or the people pleaser who just doesn't have a very good firm no. And so the people with the tightly wound or highly sensitive nervous systems need a little bit more time out. They actually need to have their no really well formed, not so they can say no and push away, which is what's going to happen if they get the ick, but so they can actually express their need for more space, for more downtime. These people might need to delay even sleeping with someone, as in sharing the same bed with them for some time, because they are not used to having another body near them or having breath down their neck while they're trying to sleep, because their sensitivities are so great or their nervous system is so finely tuned that they need time and space apart. And so this is where tiny little things that may not need to be an ick can suddenly emerge as a way of the person gaining space and distance. So this brings us to discussing the avoidant attachment and the fearful avoidance. And they get the ick when intimacy is starting to get a little bit deeper. They might be trundling along really enamored with someone, really infatuated, really loving everything. All of a sudden, it starts to get real. They start to realize that this person could be someone that they could have a relationship with, that there's a lot of tick boxes, and that can be very deeply frightening to someone who has a highly avoidant attachment or issues with intimacy, which is a lot of us. And so the ick emerges then as a way of them being able to take a giant step back and maybe even jump out of the relationship just because they've got this ick thing happening. So the ick seems to be more prevalent in women, and I think this makes sense biologically. Women are more likely to be activated in their disgust because they, at a deep biological level, are often looking for mateship opportunities. If a woman wants to breed with someone or spend a long-term relationship with them, with the potential for them to become the father of their children or just living with them for a long time, they want to know that he is clean, that he is healthy, that he has good habits, that he has a good character, I could go on and on and on. And so any of these things that aren't lining up can trigger a sudden sense of ick in the woman. I also want to note that women, obviously, who have cycles and periods, can often get really irritated when they're premenstrual. So a week, sometimes even 2 weeks before, they can be highly triggered and viscerally irritated by the sound of the man's voice, breathing, and mere existence. So if you're dating someone and you're approaching that time of the month, and there's a little bit of uncertainty about whether or not you like this guy, and you start to get your senses all wired up because you're premenstrual, and then he does something like scratching his knife along the plate, and you're like, that noise, and all of a sudden you can hear him breathing heavier, and his laugh punctuates your ears because your senses are more raw and turned up. This can lead to the ick. And I think both men and women often will get the ick when someone's character is exposed as being less than desirable, and maybe it goes against their own values. Examples would be someone who you find out eventually is really mean to animals, or talks really badly about just about everyone they know, or overshares and overshares stuff with you about people close to them, which you think is maybe a little bit personal or sensitive. Sometimes they'll reveal themselves to be a hypocrite or someone who doesn't seem to know themselves very well. So can you undo the ick? Well, first we've got to look at how has it emerged. If the ick has come up for you early in dating, it could be a big flag, and it could be your intuition telling you to get out. There is a time and a place and a certain point in dating where you could actually have a conversation with someone. You could actually try and push through the ick. Sometimes it's your early warning system giving you a big reason to bail and set that person free so that they can find someone who's better for them and appreciates everything about them, and someone that's more right for you. And sometimes down the track in dating, you've got to ask yourself the question, is this a pattern? Am I using this as an excuse to get out of this relationship because it's getting a little bit too close? Do I have issues with intimacy or closeness? Do I have an avoidant attachment, meaning I need a lot of time and space alone? Like I want a person, but I don't really want them too close to me. So knowing about yourself is probably the more important key in understanding if you can undo the ick. What is it within you that has been activated and triggered into this sudden repulsion? Are you trying to get out of a relationship? Is your gut telling you something? Or is there a pattern going on that you need to look at within yourself in terms of your individual ability to tolerate other people and their little mannerisms or the things that they do? And most of all, can you talk about it or work on it with the person? Like, is there so many good things about them that you really feel that you want to push through this ick? And if so, then I advise that you do it, because a lot of people who have moved through their icks have found out a lot about themselves and developed a deeper relationship with the other person as a result of it. So let's just jump to the question about, should you tell a person who gave you the ick that they gave you the ick? Well, no, I wouldn't do it like that, because the ick is about you. It's not about them. One man's ick is another man's yum, right? One woman's ick is another woman's ha. So if you want to talk to someone about something that they've done that's really put you off, but you really think there's so much value in that person and the relationship that's been established so far, then you want to present the information in a way that is taking full ownership of it, in a way that's not offensive to them, and in a way that allows you both to move forward. So I mentioned before about certain people pleasers, maybe highly sensitive people, highly empathic people who don't have a strong no. If you're feeling that your ick has come about through a need to distance, to step back, then you want to explore that and honor that. And that's something that's really easy to explain to another person. Maybe you could say it like this: I haven't been in a relationship for a while, and I'm finding the level of closeness that we're having is absolutely fantastic. I think you're an amazing person, and I really enjoy our time together. But I'm also aware of my need in the early stages of a relationship to have some time apart and some space, and I don't think I've been taking ownership of that. And so I want to tell you this and share it with you so that you're not picking up conflicting signals from me either. And so at the end of it, I think you need to trust your gut. You need to understand whether your ick is a sign saying jump ship now, or if your ick is something deeply fundamental to yourself that you need to work on. Look at your relationship attachment style and see if you can push through it for the betterment of yourself and in order to preserve a relationship until you do find out whether or not you are fundamentally compatible or not. So back to the question, should you tell someone who's given you the ick that they've given you the ick, or should you just ghost them? Please don't ghost them. Please explain to the person that you don't feel that things are working out between them and you want to release them back into the wilderness so that they can find their mate. You don't need to tell them that they gave you the ick unless they actually ask. This is why ghosting is such a terrible thing. There's no closure. Nobody gets any personal growth from it. There's no improvement. It's just cut and run. It doesn't really serve anyone, and I really don't like it. So if the door's left open and a person reaches out and they're like, hey, look, I thought things were going really well between us. In the service of feedback and my own self-improvement, can you tell me what went wrong? That's where you could have that conversation and say, look, I have certain little weird things about me that I don't like, and one of them showed up in you, and I'm so sorry. It's nothing to do with you and your value as a person and who you are. It's got more to do with me. And that's a really good way to finish things. And it's a really good way for me to finish this video. I really hope you enjoyed learning all about the ick. If you did, please send me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more about personal growth development or all the other psychological things that I have to share with you. And please have a good, healthy, wholesome day.